Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome back. Let us now proceed to the session of Hudec lecture, talking to Robert Hudec about international economic law today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Olabisi Akinkugbe, Vice President of SIEL, to introduce our Hudec lecturer. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the SIEL 2025 Robert Hudec lecture. Professor José Manuel Alvarez Zarate is a full professor at the Faculty of Law and the Faculty of Finance, Government, and International Relations of the Externado University of Colombia. During his professional career, he has served as an advisor on matters related to international commercial law, international arbitration, and community law of the Andean Community of Nations in the mining, port, concessions, and waste disposal, telecommunications, and services sectors. Likewise, he was an advisor to the private sector in the negotiations for the formation of the Free Trade Area of the Americas and the Free Trade Agreement with the United States, and has collaborated in the drafting of laws and decrees related to international trade, arbitration, competition, amongst others. He has been a trial lawyer before national and international courts in disputes related to intellectual property, competition law, services, distribution, and agency contracts, telecommunications, and mining. Professor José Manuel Alvarez Zarate's areas of interest, no doubt you would know now, includes international commercial and investment law, community law, and in general, international economic law. Indeed, he has almost 30 years of experience as a professor and lecturer on topics related to international law, international economic law, and international investment law. He has more than 50 publications in specialized books and magazines, and is the general editor of the International Law, Economic Law Collection, and the Contexto magazine of the Economic Law Department of the University of Externado, Colombia. When he is not doing any of the foregoing professional activities, Professor Zarate takes full delight in hiking with his 2 dogs and running. Join me in welcoming our Robert Hudec lecturer, Professor José Zarate.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. To all my esteemed colleagues, practitioners, professors, and public officials joining us today at the 9th Biennial SIEL Conference here at the National Taiwan University in Taipei. I want to express my sincere gratitude to the SIEL Executive Council for inviting me to deliver this Robert Hudec lecture. I was taken by surprise to receive the invitation at my home near to Bogota, and I was deeply moved to be asked to deliver this lecture by such a distinguished group of colleagues whom I greatly admire and respect. I'm honored to be delivering this speech today for several reasons, not least because of the importance of Professor Hudec's extensive work and legacy in the field of international economic law, but also because of the important figures who have delivered this lecture before me, including Professor John Jackson, Joseph Weiler, Professor Chang Fa Lo from National University of Taiwan, Donald McRae, Michael Trebilcock, Joel Trackman, Mary Footer, and Padidea Lai. And it is also a honor to be able to share some ideas on the politics of international law and international economic law with you. So delivering this lecture to this vibrant and broad internationalist community is challenging because I will speak about things of perhaps common ideas and values regarding law, politics, and economics that we share, but certainly with different understandings and interpretations of them. Since the first conference in Geneva in 2008, this community, which is here with us today in this beautiful Taipei, or Formosa, Isla Hermosa in Spanish, how the Spaniards named it in the 16th century, generated multiple conversations on various issues that pose important challenges relating to trade and investment law, as well as the relationship between these two and their impact on the environmental, human rights, security, and physical and economic welfare. These issues continue to resonate today in classrooms, academic corridors, and international organizations, and are also being discussed during this conference. This makes me wonder that the same issues have not been settled yet in the trade and investment systems, and that scholars, practitioners, and public officials will still have to work a lot on them with intensity, with the hope that the main issues will be solved. We do not exactly when or how, but our hope still guiding us on this. Let's begin. My lecture today is about power and law, applied to international economic law and international law. Why these two? Well, because today we are witnessing a permanent tension in international relations between the two of them, and because power behaves not differently in all areas of international law. I am sure that these are issues that everyone in this room has reflected on, and that we all have different ideas about law and power, given the many current circumstances. Many of you have been reading articles, even lectures, and in the classroom, we all attempt to explain to our students what is happening in the world today. In the context of our biennial conference, some Robert Hudec's ideas help us to discuss about the power and law. We acknowledge that the professor's extensive work continues to educate us on these matters. For this conference, I will discuss just a few of his ideas from two publications: Developing Countries in the GATT System from 1987, writing shortly after the Uruguay round started, and Thinking about the New Section 301, Beyond Good and Evil from 1990. I finished law school around the time these publications were released, 1997. I finished law school and began working at a law firm in 1990 on regulatory issues related to trade, international contracts, and investment and in Colombia. At that time, these areas were studied together and worked jointly, at least in Latin America. Now everything has changed. There is so much specialization in this area that you just only can devote time to one of them. Now, let us pause briefly to consider the title that serves as guiding principle for today's conference, Navigating New Horizons, International Economic Law in a Changing World. This title is particularly apt when considered in conjunction with Robert Hudec's work, thinking about the new Section 301, Beyond Good and Evil from 1990, which presents interesting concepts that demonstrate how nations' actions can result in substantial shifts within the international system. Consequently, as we direct our look toward the imminent future, it is reasonable to anticipate more substantial transformations in the economic, legal, and political domains. That will occur in this near future. The impending modifications will certainly present significant challenges. Nevertheless, they also present an opportunity to enhance and reintroduce serious discussions about the fairness and impartiality of the international system. The international economic law, as established, is not a neutral set of rules. It is a politically driven set of rules, ideologically motivated. For several years now, states, international institutions, such as the WTO, United Nations, and the International Court of Justice, among others, who inspire us to write and work, have been facing headwinds on their paths. They have to overcome these challenges, but today we are facing a hurricane in the horizon. The consequences of this hurricane will be devastating for many states, millions of people, and threatens stability, security, and even the survival of part of the international community. Now, let's give a short view of the inaugural SIEL conference in 2008. At that time, Professor David Trubeck commented on the relevance of Robert Hudec's works and his approach to the community and his approach to the communicative, facilitative, and coercive functions of law at the international level. And now this concept could be applied to international economic law and to international law in general. Hudec did not express much enthusiasm on the coercive function, but had hope on the communicative and facilitative ones, as Trubeck pointed out. So the role of law could or should play in the global economic order and in the international order in general is clearly defined. However, nowadays, the repeated failure to comply with the principles and fundamentals contained in the WTO and in the United Nations Charter, including commitments on climate change, among others, shows that those functions have stopped working out. But Hudec had a pragmatic view of law and politics. Politics, I would add, understood as power. Robert Hudec's pragmatic reflections on the linking of law and politics are therefore useful. But Hudec understood politics as the exercise of diplomacy in negotiations and the resolution of difference in the old gut, now not as the use of plain power as we see it today. So my understanding is that for Hudec, diplomatic discussions were given through legal institutions that have evolved in sophisticated international organizations, such as the WTO and the United Nations. This institutionalization would facilitate diplomatic conversations between member states of this organization and the rules that are subject to political interpretations. Though this kind of diplomacy, as conceived, has fallen short and is failing to resolve today's most pressing global problems, such as preventing war atrocities, war itself, respecting human rights, complying with trade rules, and environmental commitments, among others. It is clear that some states are currently abusing their power, and that diplomacy and law are proving to be ineffective in responding to those countries. We are facing a regression, a setback in international relations, where some states prefer to use hard power, even against the international rules that freely promoted and accepted not long ago. Though, disregarding the law, diplomatic efforts, and the criticism of most of the international community, we are certain that this sailing boat will take us toward a horizon full of changes, just as the title of our conference suggests. As scholars and practitioners, we must keep discussing law and power to understand and to explain the current dynamics of these two forces in the reconfiguration of the international system today. For this, we can recognize three levels of power in the international arena. In the first level, we find states with high and diverse resources of economic, military, and technological power. These states can actively influence the international system. The second level comprises states with medium power resources and medium capacity for influence the international system, and have medium power for resistance to changes. The third level states, the third level of states consists of states with low capacity to influence world politics and to resist the pressures exerted by the two previous levels. In this level, we can find most of the states of the international community. Let's see what happens to the law when different powers collide. It is clear that recent economic clashes between states that share similar power resources and are the first level of power lead to diplomatic negotiations between these states and a modification of the international rules for them, perhaps in a balanced way. But in the way of those conversations, general international rules that bind them are breached. Meanwhile, the trade confrontation between a state in the first level of power and states in the second, in the two and three, and the three, has led to the loss of multiple concessions negotiated multilaterally during the Uruguay round to create the WTO and the bilateral agreements through regional trade agreements. The conversations between these two groups of states do not seem that will end with balanced concessions. On the contrary, there are unilateral concessions for the first level state power. One thing that has sparked my attention is that this diplomatic trade dialogue between the states involved in the disputes has continued, but governments, at least in Latin America, have not demanded compliance with the agreed upon trade rules. This raises various concerns about the function of law. So the international community should be concerned about the dilution of the functions of law, the destabilizing capacity of power actions on international institutions, and the lack of effective mechanism in the WTO and the United Nations to control the excess of power. I have concerns also that even ethical appeals have failed to ensure compliance with international law, and that the legitimacy that international law has achieved as in the system to reasonably achieve greater levels of equality and justice is being lost. However, despite its imperfections, international law can still be considered morally valid, and work to achieve its compliance must be continued, because international law has undoubtedly engendered adherence and respect for most of the international community. Following Hudec, who was not only concerned with pointing out states' failures to comply with international norms, but proposed analyzing the reasons behind these failures, we could venture to suggest some of these reasons. Mainly, the inability of Western hegemonic states to maintain economic, technological, and military power under the rules designed after World War II. Also, the violation of international law could be undoubtedly explained by these following factors: changes generated by international competition over strategic natural and technological resources, changes in trade and investment flows, changes resulting from competition to maintain or access markets, and the dynamics of the struggle to achieve, consolidate, or maintain power hegemony. At this point, we could ask ourselves, where has the international law that was created with the express purpose of controlling power gone? The law is clearly insufficient and falls short when faced with the necessity to control the unrestrained exercise of power. But more importantly, we need to find solutions. It is essential that we identify the necessary changes to pursue at the global level to ensure that power does not ignore the progresses achieved in multilateral agreements. To begin answering, or at least try to answering these questions, we could give a glimpse to some historical background. Pause for a moment to reflect on how states have exercised power over the last 100 years, 80 years, within the international legal frameworks. Also consider the role of law in achieving some degree of power restraint, albeit in a limited manner. The participation of third-level states, basically developing countries, was essential in introducing to the United Nations and the GATS the recognition of the low level of economic and military power of these countries. This helped to limit the excesses of power, albeit without much success in many cases. But the rules of law to limit the power against developing countries are there. So we could expect that the international community as a whole must comply with them, such as the right of self-determination, as well as political, economic, and military non-interference on any state. I am confident that the current decline in the following international law commitments, such as the guarantees of states to protect human rights, is temporary. On the other hand, global history proves that the excessive use of power was once the norm, and that the most abusive actions were justified using a variety of legal techniques. Francisco de Vitoria, one of the founding fathers of international law, Juan Gines de Sepúlveda, and others justified through legal means Spaniard atrocities in the Americas. So the abuses of power we are witnessing today are the product of historical continuities. These continuities show us the persistence of patterns of behavior and common characteristics of power abuse since time immemorial. For the purposes of this discussion, let's go back to when the whole world was integrated into international trade. This is when the great leap towards modern economic globalization happened, and when the development of international law began in the 15th century with Francisco de Vitoria. Allow me to comment on some of these continuities. Remember the ambitious Spanish and Portuguese navigators who first ventured across the Atlantic Ocean at the end of the 15th century to reach what they called after America. They set out to open new trade routes to the east, but without really knowing where those horizons would take them, whom they would meet, and what they would face. These entrepreneurs were driven by strong aspiration to find new markets and products and a deep-seated ambition. The Spanish encounter with America led to the Portuguese, Dutch, and the English following suit. With them came much of Europe to America, which consolidated the colonization process of America, often bloody, while new voyages were undertaken. These trips encouraged Spain to reach the territories they called the Philippines, and at the beginning of the 16th century, they moved to northern Taiwan and established the colony of Formosa, again, Isla Hermosa, meaning beautiful island in Spanish, at the beginning of the 17th century. But the Spanish were expelled from Formosa by the Dutch just a few, that was power, the Dutch a few years later. On the other hand, on their way to India to compete in the spice trade dominated by the Turks and Arabs, the Portuguese and Dutch established ports along the African coast in the 15th century, which they used to reach Asia and to control the spice trade with Southeast Asia, China, and Japan. These ports were used also to initiate an infamous era of human trafficking for slavery until the 19th century. Other European powers joined in this trade. The African continent was divided up by these powers at the end of the 19th century, marking a new phase in African colonization. While the European powers engaged in a fierce competition to expand their commercial empires and dominate African, Asian, and American territories, direct conflicts led to significant wars, including the 7 Years' War, which also involved North American, Indian, and Caribbean colonies. In the case of the Middle East, from the 15th century onward, when European expansion began, the influence of that region on Europe was still felt in various fields: science, philosophy, art, and architecture, through commercial and cultural exchange. The Muslim conquest and settled in Spain from the 1700 to 1492. This is the year when Christopher Columbus arrived to America. The Ottomans established themselves in Sicily in the 9th century and in the 11th centuries, and advanced from the east to for 5 centuries, from the 14th to the early 20th century, through the Balkans and Bulgaria. It is crucial to acknowledge that a significant portion of Hungary was occupied for 150 years until the 17th century. The Ottomans even advanced to the gates of Vienna until they were decisively defeated at the Battle of Vienna in 1683. But despite the ongoing wars, trade and cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East persist. Trade treaties, finally trade, known as capitulations, ensure this exchange. These treaties granted commercial rights and privileges, including reduced tariffs and extraterritorial rights for their citizens within the Ottoman Empire. The early capitulations between 15th and 17th centuries saw the Ottoman Empire, a major power in the Mediterranean, grant capitulations to European nations such as France and Venice. This was a clear recognition of these countries as friendly powers. So the Middle East colonization was rather different and gradual until it intensified at the end of the 19th century, consolidated when the Ottoman Empire fell in the First World War, and the Middle East was divided between France and England, who were gaining market routes and influence in those territories since 18th century. This brief history which maybe for you, some of you was a little bit long, but this is brief, shows the constant dynamics between the widespread use of power and force to open trade routes and markets, and the fragility of the construction of law to guide international relations. However, it is clear that the law was always present in these processes, even if the creation of it and compliance with it was determined by the most dominant powers. We now arrive at present, the late 19th and 20th centuries, where we saw the establishment of a network of international agreements of various types, including economic agreements. It took 2 words for the powers involved in the conflict to realize that stronger global institutions were necessary to promote international cooperation in different areas. Rules were needed to prevent future wars, foster international cooperation in the political arena, and agree on a minimum set of rules. These rules prohibited the use and threat of force against the territorial integrity of any state, promoted respect for human rights and state sovereignty. It was also necessary to establish minimum rules to promote international financial stability and monetary cooperation. These rules were the first steps towards promoting the stability and predictability of international trade. The creation of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the GATT unequivocally demonstrated a commitment to the guiding force of international law and confidence in the full and proper fulfillment of the established international agreements. This was an era of international hope. Returning to Robert Hudec's ideas regarding the intertwining of law and politics in international relations, history has shown us that when law and politics are in conflict, law is usually sacrificed by force. This conflict is understood as a battle over the different uses of power. This is a historical fact, and it is a fact that is still being experienced today. However, we must recognize that the world today is undeniably better than it was 80 years ago, 100 years ago, and definitely better than was 5 centuries ago. International law has undoubtedly advanced, driving the global community toward a fairer world. Not perfect, but a better one, for sure. And once again, we must ask ourselves a question: what can we do to discipline the savage forces of power that have been unleashed for so long? What we can do here is, and right now, in our work as practitioners, academics, and officials, what can we do? The answer is simple. We must persistently demand respect for the law and work towards establishing more legitimate international rules to regulate the international conduct of the international community. I endorse Professor David Trubek's and Patrick Cottrell's work in their paper, Robert Hudec and the Theory of International Economic Law, the Law of Global Space, where they clearly state that Hudec's work on trade is essential for addressing contemporary issues in international economic law. Hudec's general analysis is still a useful way to deal with current issues of international law and power. Trubek says that Robert Hudec was a legalist who maintained his faith in rules. However, He was also pragmatic because he recognized that general standards and detailed rules can play an important but not necessarily a decisive role in a complex normative process. He demonstrated how actors employ rules in various ways and how they may reinforce them with other sources of power and persuasion. These ideas would seem to show that there is a certain form of control, not abusive power, that is necessary and accepted in order to enforce international law. However, this view does not seem to be shared by most of international community, but because experience has shown that usually the use of power is not compatible with the correct interpretation and application of the law. In addition to undermining the legitimacy and credibility of the system. Furthermore, we observe that this practice has evolved into situations such as those that we see today, which have led to a hegemonic excess in the interpretation of law. International law aims for equality, but reality is often one of power dynamics to gain different meanings of equality. Another work of Robert Hudec serves well for this lecture. The approach in the essay, thinking about the new section 301, Beyond Good and Evil, from 1990. Hudec's criticism is still pragmatic. For him, criticism of the United States to claim that international law has been broken is too simple, and it's not enough to understand how particular states interact, the reasons of their positions, and the benefits resulting from these positions. So in this work of 1990, Hudec's views are clear. Instead of simply condemning the United States, he uses the example of Section 301 to argue for the value and the legitimacy of disregarding international rulemaking bodies like the GATT. His thesis is that one can view Super 301 Act as justified disobedience. Despite this controversial thesis, what is interesting to point out is that by unilaterally imposing trade sanctions, imposing trade barriers, or raising tariffs, the United States would be highlighting problematic areas and often forces international organizations to make necessary reforms to their own rule-making and adjudicatory bodies. Hudec argued that it is possible and even likely that needed reforms would not be made without the forcing function of justified disobedience. So Hudec ignores the dead end of collective disapprobation and tried to explain why the United States chooses such kinds of decisions, whether U.S. actions can be justified and why these actions may benefit international trade in the end. By accepting the justification for non-compliance with international law for the purposes of reforming, it could be interpreted as accepting that hegemonic powers may be able to encourage changes in international institutions and rules when they no longer suit them, rather than promoting changes through the mechanisms provided for that purpose within the institutional framework. However, the justifications for repeated breaches in trade law show that it is necessary to create an organization other than the WTO, if WTO is not reformed. Also, because the promises of development, growth, and widespread well-being for all that accompanied GATT's negotiations were not fulfilled for most developing countries. We can see also that the WTO promoters' expectations regarding the maintenance of global economic and trade control, as well as control over information and technology, went out of their control. So this is an organization that does not serve anyone anymore and should disappear or at least radically change. In the case of developing countries, following the signing of the WTO in 1994, developing countries proceed with the dismantling of tariffs and administrative barriers to trade, such as import licensing systems, among others. They also adopt strict knowledge protection regimes without providing compensation for technology transfer and dismantle their industrial policies to comply with TRIMs. After applying all these policies for more than 30 years, achieving high levels of balanced development appears to be challenging for developing countries under the current trade rules. The likelihood of achieving development is even lower if the new proposals to create an additional framework of exceptions to accommodate the monumental and extraordinary subsidies of developed countries to promote industrial sectors are successful. Consequently, in light of the challenges posed by agricultural subsidies, the obstacles encountered by exports from developing countries, and the new wave on the industrial subsidies, the rationale for maintaining the WTO is declining rapidly. Something should be done soon. In the words of Hudec work in 1997, developing countries in the GATT systems, when he argued that, I open quotes, and I quote, the present regime does not work well for developing countries that are still intended, that are its intended beneficiaries and should be replaced, close the quote. Hudec was somewhat pessimistic about the relationship with developing countries becoming more productive within GATT. However, his hopelessness offered a shine of hope. He said that there are those who believe that the GATT, and now the WTO, has become so committed to the current policy that the only way to change it would be to start a new organization. Finally, and to conclude, the brief review of the current global landscape reveals that ongoing challenges such as civil unrest, international tensions, and fierce competition for resources and markets need a response from the whole community. We are currently observing various nuances in the way countries with the capacity to generate change in the global economic and political order are producing it. Many of these states' actions are contingent on the exercise of different means of power, including economic, diplomatic, and military intervention. Furthermore, it is important to acknowledge that the rationales provided for these actions frequently lack credibility and are not aligned with the United Nations Charter, the WTO, human rights principles, and other international commitments. I think that if Hudec were with us today, he would likely be advocating for a reform of the trade system and contributing to the promotion of change in other international institutions through his work. Consequently, we should examine how we can contribute to the advancements of the world legal system through our academic and practical work. I will be happy to hear your comments. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Zarate, for the excellent lecture. I'll resist the temptation of trying to talk about it in any terms that might otherwise appear reductionist. And so move on straight to Q&A, and hopefully the folks will be ready to have a conversation with you. So if you're ready to have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then we can get into this. Okay, thank you very much. Leila.
Jose, thank you very much for reminding us of a few things we all know very well, but which are important to bear in mind. As a specialist of investment law working in Latin America, can you give us a few examples of a concrete incarnation of this continuation of neo-colonial international law?
Do you want us to take two at a time, or would you rather have it one?
Another one. Well, yeah, we can have another one.
Okay, all right. So did I say hand at the back? Okay, I thought I said someone there. That's okay. Okay, so you can go with the first one.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leila, for your question. Our legal institution, our international institutions, as I said, as I see those have continuities. And in international investment law, we had, since Francisco de Vitoria in the 15th century, he proposed and he said as a legal doctrine that the colonizers, the Spaniard colonizers, had the right of establishment. So you can find there one of those institutions, the right of establishment in these new territories, and they had also the right to go against the people that were living in these new lands that were discovered back then, to go to war if they were not friendly. So in general, this institution we can find some similarities because the right of establishment is still there. There is a principle of in GATS, sorry. And of course, there is not a right to engage in a war with the countries that are not friendly. Well, maybe some exceptions right now, but within the system, in the investment system, there is a framework to settle the disputes with the states. So in general, I can see that, and in the negotiations, when you see the negotiations, or at least is what I saw in the case of Colombia, it was most of imposing the terms of the treaties. At least it was since we started to do real negotiations, or not so real, since the 2002, after 10 years, after the 10 years of seeing this wave of claims against Latin American states, against Argentina and Ecuador, Venezuela. So, and we see the terms of the treaties were not possible to negotiate on the side of the less developed countries, and so that's why you see some models. You see the Swiss model in Colombia is the same as with Ecuador and Argentina. You see, you should have when you see in the case of Colombia, which is the case that I most know. We have different models. We should have. We have a model, a model of BIT, but it doesn't work at all. I mean, because what we have implemented the models of all the countries that we have negotiated, all developed countries. So I can see those continuities and how the power works when negotiating an investment treaty.
Thank you. Is there a question at this time? Oh, okay, yeah, I was just going to jump.
Feel like I'm national TV now. Thank you for your presentation. It was super interesting. I wanted to ask you, I mean, following up on what Leila's asked you, the other way around. When the countries from the developing world, from the South, negotiate between themselves, do you see anything different? Do you see any pattern? Do they do things differently when they're not caught up in the North-South dynamic? And if they don't, maybe you can advance why they don't do something different, or highlight what is different, if there's any difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. There are many differences. I've seen differences in trade agreements, in investment agreements. Like we have the umbrella clauses. In some countries, with the United States, we have an umbrella clause in the BIT that we have with the United States. With Peru, with Chile, and Mexico, we don't. We have clear environmental exceptions, real ones. And we don't have a clear environmental exception with Canada and with the United States. So, you can see that. And we have more rules and the environmental exceptions, the human rights exceptions are more concrete, more, they have more rules in concrete in our BITs with Mexico, with Costa Rica, the treaty that we have with them. So there are differences. I mean, you see there is a balance of power, and then we can write different treaties with some differences. We can see that.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Amrita. Okay.
Following up on that question, Rodrigo's question, Professor José Manuel, how do you explain those differences, right? Should we see them as a question of capacity? Should we see them as a question of familiarity when it comes to different developing economies in the same region trying to negotiate something together for regional integration? Or should we see that as a question of similar conditions, similar developing conditions? What causes that sort of difference between among global South countries, which is so different from global South, global North sort of negotiations? Because as I can see from your response, I think we're looking at more specific and concrete commitments in this case, vis-a-vis the other scenarios. So what are the dynamics that are coming into the play here?
I think that the engagement in between the two countries, the conversation in between the countries is more fluid. I mean, there is, when I used to remember a cartoon that was published in a Peruvian newspaper when Colombia, Peru, we negotiated with the United States at the same time the free trade agreement with the United States. And the cartoon said, it showed the US trade negotiator and the Peruvian minister. And the cartoon said, the Peruvian said, I want X and Y. And the American says, I want C. And in the following one, it said, the Peruvian one said, I want X. An American, I want C. And the third one, it says, the Peruvian said, okay, I want C. And the American, so you see how we agree? So this is to say that what I saw in the trade negotiations is that the hard powers did not move an inch, in the case of the United States. Some of my colleagues from the Ministry of Trade, of course, they don't think the same, but I can understand. But they spent 4 years negotiating. But that was what happened. Not an inch. I mean, we have footnotes on things that are irrelevant in the treaties that do not say anything, I mean, anything that it was moved is in a footnote, and that footnote meaningless. So, in the other side, I mean, among us, and when I say among us, because now you live in Mexico, in the Mexico with Mexico, the negotiations with Mexico. Mexico is a hard country to negotiate, but we found common grounds on different issues, and the language changed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Zarate, for your presentation. My question is, how do you perceive the ongoing reform, and if that reform can take into account the voices of Latin America, Global South, and if not, what would be your solution, or how the reform should go to please, I'm not saying your perspective, but the perspective which you represent?
You mean the current reform in the ISDS, right? Okay. Well, the current reform is the reform that the European Union wants. And it has been, I've been attending to the meetings in Vienna and in New York, in UNCITRAL. And the main interest of the European Union has advanced very quickly. I mean, 5 years is relatively quickly. And it has the support of Canada with some differences. But what I see is that the most important and pressing issues for the Global South are not there. They are not going to, my perception is that, my perception, no, and the reality, because the negotiations are being, perhaps it will end by the end of this year or next year, and did not include the Global South, the important Global South issues, such as in damages, which is very important, because anything that happens in damages, it has a huge impact on the budgets of the states that are being sued. So damages is an area where arbitrators have different perspectives and very controversial. So yeah, I don't see that is going to a reform that really is balanced. is balanced for everyone. So, yes. What would I like to see? Of course, I would like to see a more balanced negotiations where the voice of the Global South, that it was in the room, it was heard. But the dynamics of the negotiation, I see that some countries of the Global South say X, Y, Z, and in the following meetings, those voices weren't heard. I mean, they are heard in the room, but they are not heard in the papers that are being written so far. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Professor Zarate. Just before I go to the next question, you touched on something which I think is often, at least in my view, overlooked in the question in the third pillar of international economic law, which is in the international financial world, right? That nexus you just alluded to between, damages awarded, the dynamics of the measurement of calculation being an issue, but actually the amount, quantum as well. But its nexus to the debt profile of many developing countries is often, treated as separate issues. But I do think it's a very important point you've just alluded to, which would merit its own conversations outside of this time. Marcus, now over to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks so much, José Manuel, for your talk. So I'm going to have a question that's going to challenge you, because on the one hand, you say, so the question is, how can developing countries achieve better negotiating outcomes with more developed countries or more powerful countries? So on the one hand, the cartoon shows a bilateral negotiation is difficult. It's just almost impossible to do, which is why Trump under 1.0, forget 2.0 for now, always wanted these bilateral negotiations and basically sidelined the WTO and so forth. On the other hand, either plurilaterals or multilaterals, as you just said, are also difficult, at least in some forms, right, when you think UNCITRAL. So what are the pathways to achieve that in reality, like better outcomes? So if it's not bilateral, and if it's not multilateral, what is it? What's the in-between? Where you would say, here are some ideas of making it happen. Is it concessions from the likes of the more powerful players that are just necessary? Is it coalition building in a stronger way without being picked off? So picked off meaning post-Brexit, we had this idea that, for example, a number of African countries we could band together, but fairly easily picked off because it didn't take very much for the UK to basically put a carrot or a stick in place, and all of a sudden what used to be a good negotiating stance fell apart fairly quickly. So concretely, what should be done?
Well, the Global South should be, I know it's difficult. I mean, it won't happen, I think, but it's my wish, it's my hope, it's my dream. And when I wake up, it's the nightmare with my eyes open. And the Global South should be more united. I mean, and try to stick together, knowing that part of the strategy is to split those attempts of unity. One can see how, in the case of Mercosur, which is Mercosur is Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Many attempts since in the middle of the 1990s, after the WTO was created, many attempts to divide them occur by trying to take Uruguay or Paraguay out of the agreement by some countries. And you could see that over and over, and in the Andean Pact as well. In the case of the Andean Pact, which was Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. Venezuela is no longer in the Andean Pact, and Bolivia. That strategy worked. Try to pull Colombia and Ecuador to have some concessions in different, and they fracture the community, the Andean community. So the short questions would be, try to stick together, stay together, to be in the negotiations, and so better outcomes would arise for the global South. Otherwise, it would be as we are right now.
Is there any other question? Oh, yes, I get it.
I thought I had a question and then I didn't, and then Lockney pointed at me. Thank you so much for your lecture. It reminds me of a lecture that Tony Angie gave at Edinburgh a few weeks ago, and it was on the idea of property and how taking possession was how the West explained everything, how colonial powers explained everything, using the language of the law. And then it struck me what you said about voices not being heard and thinking back to the individual. The reality is, at least in the UK, that we tell the students who come from all over the world that they will be the future leaders back in their own countries or within the EU or whatever. This is the story that we sell them. And very often they do go to, sorry, this is turning into a story. Very often they do go back and they take up those positions of trade negotiators or go and work for different commissions. But they go and do that with the mindset that they have learned in the UK, in the Netherlands, wherever. And it's really, what is your opinion about this? Is there a responsibility on us as academics in those colonial places that still hold so much power to change that narrative, right? Because it might go back to the individual. Thank you.
That is a hard one. As I see it, I will respond in this way. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And I follow very closely Anthony Angie's work, and you just saw it here. And it is a matter of power again. I mean, it's and who are the professors in these institutions? I wonder. I mean, now, as you can see, I have my hair, the little hair that I have is white already. Things have changed in the last 30-something years. I see more empathy in many universities in Europe and in the United States. I see a more diverse professorship. But you cannot, and what I want to express is that you cannot have just one single idea. You just cannot teach single ideas of one thing. So you need diversity, and that is important. and as you said, many of the people that run our countries come with the mindset, and they believe with their eyes closed on how free markets, deregulation, is the formula that it is needed for these countries. And It doesn't. I mean, right now we see that the way we negotiated, the agreements that we accept did not work. Our industrial capacity is in the ground, is what I see in Latin America. After the free trade agreements and the WTO, that's what happened, and we cannot compete. We cannot compete with the resources that we have, and those resources we won't ever have them. The distances in between the capacities that less developed countries have right now in front of middle and, of course, the hegemonic ones is immense. So it's difficult to compete right now. So try to answer to Marcus somehow, it's a new framework are needed. I mean, we need to work in different ways, just to not to contract the pie, but to expand it in somehow to have everyone in. And that's what the young scholars like you should help us to develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Alex from National Taiwan University. So you mentioned that you dreamed about that the global South should unite together, and you wake up, it's a nightmare. I'm thinking whether that could be another bigger nightmare. Here's my hypothetical scenario. The global South can unite, but the global North can also unite as well. There could be a chance that the global North simply unite together, negotiate their rules, come up with their rules without inviting the global South into the membership, and they create their rules, and the rules basically govern their own, of course, but necessarily some spillover effect. This is probably not that hypothetical. It's actually in the international banking world, right? The Basel principles under the international banking world basically negotiated between some gentlemen's club. It's not that inclusive. It's not multilateral. There are only some certain advanced economies that join that club in negotiating all these Basel rules on the banking supervision, but that applies to the world, although in the soft law form, but everybody basically follows. I'm curious how you would comment on that scenario. Is that a bigger nightmare, or is that actually something nice to have, or is it something that you would think about? I'm curious about your comments on that.
No, just come to reality. That's it. Reality, I mean, from an academic point of view, we can talk about these things and try to think in ways to try to solve the problems that the world has. It's not just because there is a lot of, what I have seen also is that poverty is growing in the developed world. I mean, poverty that I didn't see and I never saw 40 years ago or more. Poverty has grown everywhere. So it's not just the poverty of the global South, it's just the poverty of the developed world, of the developing world, okay? And so I don't know how, but people that are being left behind need responses for their needs. And the world, I mean, as we see it today, it's not working for the majority of the people everywhere. I don't have a response, of course, and now it's not. It's not what I know. Reality, of course. I know the dynamics of power. I know, and as a lawyer, I see the rules. I say, okay, those are the rules. I do not like them, but I have to follow them. I mean, I cannot do anything differently. And in my lecture, what I try to show is the importance of law. And the creation of how we are creating the law. What we should have in those transformations that law can achieve. But as a lawyer, we should follow what is in the commitments. And if we want to change the commitments, we need to change it within the system, not outside the system. This is one of the other things that I would like to highlight with my lecture. Thank you.
Peter van den Bossen. I will be the last one to diminish the importance of law. And I will be the last one to say that there is no need to reform the rules under which we currently work. But one thing that I don't think should be part of the future is to think in terms of the global south versus the global north. I think the global south is a bit of a fiction. It's a very, very diverse group. It includes countries like Brazil, China, and India, which in the context of the WTO are always counted. Nothing happens within the WTO without them agreeing to it. Now, very little happens, but they're definitely on the table, around the table, when new rules are even considered, to the extent that they want to take part of that conversation. So this idea of the global south, I think, should not be part of a way in which we think about the future. The same goes for the global north, or the developed world. We also see there huge differences in countries that we count to be part of the developed world. In short, I think we might want to think of the world as being much more diverse than north and south. And in trying to come to a new international economic order, I think that should be a starting point.
Thank you. I agree with you. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's the diversity. It's there, but there are some commonalities among. I mean, do not talk about states. Just talking about people. It's talking about the people that lives human rights, human beings. And we see people that are being left behind everywhere, despite the diversity that we have. Because we see in Brazil and in India very big companies and rich communities, but we see also very, very, very poor communities. And a new system, I don't know which one, but it's something that we would need to reflect. How we could work for the people that is being left behind, that needs to eat 3 times a day at least. I mean, most of the people, I mean, 50% of the populations in at least in South America do not eat 3 times a day.
But you will also find people that are left behind in developed countries.
Of course, yeah.
So I share your view that we should be caring for people that are left behind.
For all of them.
But you find them all over the place.
Yeah.
Perhaps, obviously, more in developing countries, larger numbers, but also in developed countries.
Yeah, right. So we should be thinking on that. And what kind of a system, international system, would help to take out all those people from that conditions? It would be what I said. And thank you, Peter. And now we're almost done, I think.
Yeah, we're almost there. And, you know, I don't want to be that moderator who insists people will have to wait 5 more minutes before getting to their wine. Okay, Timothy. Okay, Gregory Messenger. Okay, all right. So quick one. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg Messenger, University of Bristol. A quick one. So, yes, I agree fully with a lot of what you've said. In the UK, for the first time since the Second World War, we have a generation of children who are born shorter than their previous generation, which is really sort of nominally one of the richest countries in the world. The division is really worrying. The solutions to these things are education, investment in infrastructure, transport, skills. None of these things really are related to FTAs directly, right? Mm-hmm. Or really the WTO. Which part of the system do we want to rethink? Which part of the system do we want to really focus on? My instinct is that actually trade instruments aren't really the focus, because the way you solve the problems with trade agreements isn't through trade policy, it's through education and elsewhere. But which are the bits? My sense is maybe finance, or I sort of welcome views, because it's the sort of block where I feel like we get to a point in the conversation and then it kind of just stops and we say it's terrible, we've got to do something. But sort of where should we be focusing our attention? Thank you.
Just before you respond, a quick one. So the last question from you, Leila, since you had your hand up, just to be fair.
Sorry. Just because to build upon which what has just been said, you said it very well. 40% of the world lives under the poverty line, while 1% of the world owns 40% of the resources. And we know it's not a global north, global south problem, it's within. This being said, what's the role of international economic law? Is it to enable capital, as we've done before, and to create a greater divide, to create greater inequalities, what we are still doing? Or is it simply to regulate or to transform?
I see your two questions are very related. So, I mean, this would sound like a presidency campaign. what I'm going to say, we need to work in. I mean, there are many promises that should be done. We have to do a lot of things. We need to work on health, on internal regulations, in public services, in investment, infrastructure, and all those things that are not related to trade. And in that sense, you're right. So it's not just trade. It's the whole system. The whole system. I mean, we should think differently. If we want to really transform the world, otherwise we will still in the same, with the same problems without solving them, and having these conferences every 2 years talking about more adding problems to the problems that we didn't solve 10 years ago. So because we haven't solved anything. If you see when we had the first conference in 2008, we have the same issues going on, but now we added another ones without solving the old ones that when we start with SIEL. So we're adding more problems instead of solving the ones that we have. So this is a good conversation. I finish my lecture saying I would like to hear your comments more than what I can say. This is a good motive to talk about these things that are that we cannot solve.
Okay, so just before I invite you to join, me in thanking our lecturer, I think, the issues you've put on the table in my words, so not in your words, and I think whether we think about it in the sense of global inequality, which has accentuated, and for which, whether you look at, the US, Canada, or Nigeria, there's Global South there, because precisely Global South is not a location. It is the existence of these characteristics that are so fluid that they permeate everywhere, wherever you might be located. Whether it's in the context of, the rise of corporations and how they have hijacked, right, the economy, whether it's climate change, whether it's how we should think about plurality of thoughts in legal education, whether it's the question of reform, or whether there's those important questions of social and economic, rights and inequality. Talking to Robert Hudec about international economic law today certainly offers much more complications and complexity than you would have many years ago. So please join me in thanking Professor Zarate for these interesting lectures. And so, as he has said, he would love to continue these conversations. We're moving right on to the drinks section. Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Professor Zarate. The second day of the conference is now concluded. We would like to express our utmost appreciation for your attendance, with special thanks to our distinguished speakers, moderators, discussants, and all the participants. Please join the Hudec lecture drink reception in the lobby outside the conference hall. Once again, we kindly request guests not to drink or eat in the carpeted area. And lastly, please be noted that for the Early Careers Researchers meeting, we will meet at 8:30 a.m. in room 1710. Thank you and have a nice day. 本次研讨会的第二天议程已经结束，诚挚的感谢所有的与会讲者、嘉宾与主持人，也感谢各位来宾的热情参与。我们在大厅备有茶水，诚挚邀请所有嘉宾移步享用，谢谢。我们期待第3天再与您相见。明天的 Early Career Researchers Meeting 将于早上8点半于教室1701开始。谢谢，并祝各位有个美好的一天。谢谢。